Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I leave my house for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a beautiful morning here in mid-July in suburban Chicago. We're just coming out of a nasty heat wave. I don't know what the weather's supposed to be like tomorrow, but we're about 20 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than we were yesterday. And it's actually pleasant to go out walking. So here I am, walking. I hope that your summer is going well. I had a lovely journey to the wilds of Michigan to spend some time with my family. Had a nice time getting to see my nieces and nephews and getting to spend time with my sister-in-law and her husband and my other sister-in-law and her husband. My kids sure enjoyed connecting with their cousins and having a grand old time. So all in all, it was an excellent trip. We got to play quite a few games, although not as many as I thought. While my sister-in-law and her husband do play some games, they don't really like to play games the way that I do or the way that, say, my mother-in-law does. So we thought that we would be playing more games than we did, which meant I brought a lot more games than we played. Probably fully 30 or 40% of the games I brought we didn't play, which is fine. Part of why I bring a lot of games is so we have a lot of choice. But it was a little disappointing because I made an effort to find games that would play 6 to 8, and then we didn't get to play them very much, or most of those games didn't get played, and I thought they would. So that was a little bit of a bummer. Nothing huge, but there it is. One of the side effects, though, is that I had picked out games that I thought not only would be good, but would be easy to teach, and that I thought the kids could handle, or at least handle a little more easily. And so I have a number of games that I picked that I hadn't played in a while. So I thought today's episode would have two sections to it. There'd be one revisiting old favorites. So I'll talk about 3 games that I have played a lot. They're probably definitely these 3 are in my top 20 in terms of number of plays, just because they're short. And they're games that I tend to play on trips with family. And then I thought I would talk about 3 older games that we played as well. And by older, I mean way older. You'll see what I mean when I get to it. So those are going to be our 2 sections today. Buckle in. It's going to be a good ride. Before my daughter had so many swim meets to go to, we used to take a road trip, maybe every other summer, to somewhere far away. We went to Washington one year. We went to Maine one year. What was the third one? I feel like we've done 3 of these. I'm having trouble picking the third one. We went to the year we went to Washington. We also went to Banff. Oh, and we did a road trip to Disney one year. So we've done a number of these long trips with the kids, and often I will bring games with to help us entertain ourselves while we're on these journeys. The games that work best for this are games that usually just a deck of cards or something simple. Oh, Alaska was the other one. Games that we can put in our pocket and play, or carry in a small container and play. I have I have 2 boxes of photo boxes. So they're sort of large plastic cases that have small plastic cases inside, and then in them I've put small card games. So they're sort of organized and labeled. That works pretty well. I keep a lot of the small card games we have in those boxes. But I thought I would talk about a few of those games that we played that I've played so many times, they're kind of old familiars for us. The first one, the one that got the most play on this trip, was One Night Ultimate Werewolf. This is a game I play probably a dozen times a year, if not more. Probably in half a dozen sessions. Usually we play 2 or 3 games in a session, and because there's a winner and loser in each one, I generally will record them each as their own play, which means that in my board game stats, the One Night Ultimate Werewolf has so many plays, because we'll play three in a session usually. But so we got that out, and that turned out to be the best game for the whole family to play. Our youngest player was 7, and we had a 9-year-old as well, and they both really liked it. I'm not sure they totally understood. There was at least one time when the youngest was supposed to be the drunk, and she just didn't switch her card with the middle, I think. But so there were a few little mix-ups like that, but that's part of the fun of that kind of game. And we all had a good time accusing each other of being werewolves and that sort of thing. So that one went over the best. Like I said, we played it several times in several settings. I probably got my annual 12 plays of One Night Werewolf in just during this week trip. On the other hand, though, it did get a little old toward the end, especially when we couldn't switch the roles out. So one of the dangers or challenges of playing with a younger player like that is that some of the more complicated roles that are included in the expansions, which I have the Daybreak expansion, weren't really available for us to use, because if the younger player got that expansion, they wouldn't be able to play it. I would also say that while One Night Werewolf is really good with like 8, we were playing with 12 or 11, and I think that probably exceeds its maximum quality. That once you get above, say, well, I think 8 is probably about the perfect number for it. Once you get above 10 or even 9, it starts to get a little creaky. The close your eyes part takes too long, especially because our family, we never include villagers, because that's boring to not have a role at all. So that's One Night Ultimate Werewolf. I broke out Love Letter, which is a game we hadn't played in a very long time, at least a year or two. And it's Love Letter is a really good pocket game. You throw it in your backpack. The first time we played it was at a diner while we were waiting for the food to come out. I had the kids on my end, so I broke that out and we entertained ourselves a little bit until the food came. It's still a really good game. I understand why people got tired of the micro game phenomenon. I think I've played a number of micro games that aren't great or are too complicated for the cards you have. I have Pod X, and I haven't been able to get that played really because there's a lot going on the cards, and the difficulty of understanding what's going on these tiny cards gets in the way. Whereas Love Letter is a pretty simple kind of bluffing and deduction game. If you haven't played it, you have a roll and you're trying to guess the rolls of the other players before they guess your roll and kick you out of the round. A round takes about 5 minutes, and usually you play till someone has won 4 rounds. So a full game of Love Letter played as the rules state, it takes about 45 minutes, but it's generally pretty rare to play that long in my experience. So that's the Love Letter, another one we played a lot, and that I have played many, many times. The third one I want to mention is Bonanza. Bonanza is a favorite of mine as a simple card game that's got just a nifty mechanism. It's about farming beans. It's designed by Uwe Rosenberg, and it's got really stupid art. It's sort of funny, but I don't know. It looks like it's a game for children, but it really isn't. It's pretty complicated. But the central mechanism, the central thing that's cool about it is that you can't rearrange your hand. So when you get cards in Bonanza, they go in the back of your hand, and you have to play cards out of the front of your hand. The idea is that you're managing a bean farm. You're supposed to be growing as many beans as you can of a certain type, and then when you rip them up, or when you harvest them, you get points based on how many bean cards you harvested. And then you keep those cards, which actually provides an interesting challenge to card counters, because you're taking cards out of the game as points. So then it's hard to keep track of how many are left in the deck. It's a trading game, and in that regard, it's pretty fun at 3 or 4. It's not a good 2-player game. I think there's a 2-player variant, but we played as 3 players, and that works pretty well. 4 works really well as well. This game has a lot of strong memories for me because we played it on our Alaska trip, or more accurately, I played it a couple times on our Alaska trip, and then Grandma and the 2 kids, and sometimes my wife, played it while we were driving, because we had rented a Winnebago, one of those big campers, and I drove this camper around all of Alaska, it seemed like. And while I was driving, I would listen to them. Does anybody want some baked beans? Hey, I've got these stink beans. Does anyone want these chili beans? And so on. So I really enjoy playing Bonanza, in part because I didn't get to play it nearly as much as the rest of my family did during that time. And that's another game I just hadn't played in a while. The last of these family favorites that I got to break out was Deadman's Draw. Now, if you haven't played Deadman's Draw, it's an interesting pushy luck game with a little bit of skill in that you can certainly influence whether you're going to win or not. You can certainly influence how you're going to blast other people to take that. But mostly it's just a good kind of end of the night or beginning of the night sort of simple game. What you're doing is you're collecting cards, and you're doing it by flipping over cards and making a row. And the basic premise is there's 10 suits, and in each suit there's a certain number of cards. Each one is worth points. So if at the end of the game you have the 4 sword, you get 4 points. If you have the 4 sword and the 5 sword, you get 5 points. You get points for whatever the highest number card you have for each suit. So the goal is to get a wide variety of suits, but you really have no control over which cards you get, or very limited control, because the way the game works is you have this deck of cards with these 10 suits, all these cards in it, and on your turn you flip a card over. Then some of the cards have a special power that they activate. Most of the cards do. Then you choose whether to flip another card over or bank the cards you've flipped. That's it. Now the cards that you flip over, they have powers like letting you peek at the next card, or taking a card from your opponent and adding it to the row, or taking a card out of your own bank and adding it to the row, or protecting the cards that are previous, or there's a bunch of things. But the main thing is, when you flip that next card, if it matches the suit of any of the previous cards you flipped, you bust and you lose all the cards that you've flipped so far. So from that perspective, there is a certain amount of just luck. It's not uncommon. I've had this happen to me, I've seen it happen to other people, where you have 2 or 3, sometimes 4 turns in a row, where when you flip your second or third card, you bust. And almost always people flip at least 3 cards. It's pretty rare to see someone stop at 2, unless they have a really good reason. I don't know that I've ever stopped at 1. I guess there could be circumstances where I would, but not usually. Even if you have the highest point scoring card in each category, often you wouldn't want to stop at 1 because you want to get through the deck faster so the game ends and you win. Or if you get more cards, then that adds those cards to the bottom of your suit stack, which means that if someone attacks you and takes that high scoring one, you still have another one in that category to score points from. So there's almost always incentive to keep playing. Now the game in its vanilla form, the way I've described it, is fine. It's pretty light. There are roles that you can play where each player gets a special power that they get to do. And then there are also, what's the word I'm looking for? Conditions that apply to each game that shape the scoring. Oh, well, there's a variety of them. There's one that changes the scoring from only the highest one in the suit to all of them in the suit. There's one that changes the scoring that says if you go over 60 points, you lose. There's another one that says the first one to 50 points wins, which is interesting because usually you play till the end of the game. And points go wildly up and down depending on when you bust and how many people steal your cards and that sort of thing. So saying the first to 50 wins is a real change, real significant change. So there's a variety of different ways that the game changes how you might win. And then the special powers introduce vast differences in what you can do and what your characters can do and so on. So my son really likes that one because it's a short game. It's got high variance, so the luck involved takes away some of the pleasure, some of the sting of losing because, well, the cards just weren't with you. I mean, for an aggressive gamer or somebody who really enjoys deep games, it's not that interesting, but it is fun to play. So, Dead Man's Draw, if you get a chance, it's a nice filler. or a really nice, like, you're chatting anyway kind of game. So that was the fourth game that I wanted to mention today, as in terms of games that I've played a lot that came out on this trip. That said, we also had a number of games that came out that I haven't played in a really long time and are really old. So I would say the most common thing played at the cabin, it's like a lake cabin we were at, were standard card games using a deck of 52 cards. This was interesting to me because I don't generally play very many games like this, because we have so many games that are more interesting, frankly. When you're playing a game of cards with the standard 52 deck, you're pretty much always playing an abstract. And a lot of these are fun, but I don't know. I find theme really adds a lot to a game for me, and variety of mechanisms does a lot as well. And neither of those is the case in most card games. They fall into a couple of standard categories. That said, I did play a fair number of card games while I was at the cabin as well. The first and most common one that would be being played was Patience. Sometimes known as Solitaire. Patience is the single-person card game where you lay out 7 stacks of cards in descending height, and then you draw cards from a draw deck, and you try to rearrange the cards such that at the end they've all been piled by suit and in order. And if you can get stuck, and that's how you lose, if you are unable to uncover some of the cards. It's a fine game and a worthwhile activity. It pushes your mind to think a little bit about how to be flexible. I mean, ultimately, it's not a great game, but it's a very pleasant way to spend a half an hour or 20 minutes or something. I really enjoy playing it as a 2-player game. There's a competitive variant where you and the other player are both working on your own deck, working on getting a stack of cards displayed, and you're allowed to use your opponent's stack. What I prefer as an option is the cooperative variant, where our goal is to have us both successfully navigate the game, and we can use the 2 sets of card stacks to help the other person get past a stuck point. Like I said, the challenge of Patience is that sometimes you'll get cards dealt underneath and you just can't get to them. If you're playing with another player and they can get to the card you need, and that can let you rearrange your table in such a way that you can discard or remove a card that will help, that makes a difference and can result in a win. So it was in that form that I played it a couple times and had a good time with it. Another old-timey card game that I got to play a bit was Euchre. Euchre is my sister-in-law and her husband's favorite game. They play it a lot, I guess, or used to. And from that regard, we had fun. I played Euchre a lot in high school, and I remember enjoying it quite a bit. At some point, my group of friends discovered 500, which is basically Euchre using a whole deck instead of a half deck. So in case you haven't played Euchre, Euchre is a classic trick-taking game using a standard deck of cards in which you've removed half of the deck. You only use 9 and up on the cards, and so you use 9 through ace of each suit. It's got a bidding element where you are trying to decide whether you are going to take 3 tricks or the other team is going to try to take 3 tricks, and you get a point if you get the 3 tricks you tried for, or 2 points if you get all 10 tricks, or all 5 tricks. If your opponents manage to get the 5 tricks instead of you, then they get the point instead of you. There is the bidding element is sort of interesting because there's always an element of chance. Some cards go into a blind and are not used each round. And then you also have an element where, as a player, you are going to take the bid and try to decide whether you and your partner can make it, and you're not allowed, obviously, to communicate with your partner. It's a pretty classic trick-taking game. It's fine. Too much luck for my taste. I played plenty of 500. As I said, that was my main game in college that we played that was cards. And I found 500 really satisfying because you have enough cards in hand that there's a fairly high level of trickery and opponent reading to do in order to win. 500, or in euchre, you get 5 cards. There's 5 tricks in the hand, and it doesn't feel robust enough for my taste. That said, there is certainly some skill in knowing what to lead and reading your opponents, and it was a pleasant diversion to play the game of euchre that we played. That said, it's not a game I'm gonna really strive to engage with. The third game that I played that's more of an old-time game that I was excited to try again, and my wife and I enjoyed quite a bit, is cribbage. Now, cribbage is a game that I learned when I was in summer camp in, let's say, 9th grade. And I had a friend who had cribbage, and he taught me how to play it, and we played it a whole bunch the week I was at summer camp. And I liked it enough that I asked for a cribbage board for my birthday, and I got one. Just this cheap, it's like a cheap $10 cribbage board that would have been at the discount shelf at Target, I'm sure. It's actually a little warped, so it wobbles on the table, but it's a fun game. So I reread the rules and relearned it and taught it to my mother-in-law and my wife, and we played. And my mother-in-law didn't really like it. The scoring was annoying for her, but my wife did. And so we actually played a round of cribbage yesterday since we got home, in which I won by 3 points. We thought she was going to win, but I barely squeaked out a win. And I think it may become a regular kind of game for us because it only takes about a half an hour. There's a fair amount of luck, but a fair amount of skill as well. As you get better at it, apparently you start stealing points from other people, which is not something we've done yet, but certainly could. So if you haven't played cribbage, I'll explain. In cribbage, you get a hand of a certain number of cards. Let's say in a 3-player game, you would get 5 cards. And there's 1 card dealt to a face-down pile called the crib. Each player then takes 1 card out of their hand and puts it in this crib to make a total of 4 cards there, and leaving 4 cards in their hand. You cut the deck and you add a card. You take a card from the deck and put it face up. That's called the starter. It creates a 5th card that you can use when you're counting your hand, which comes later. Then the person to the left of the dealer starts, and you take in turns playing the 4 cards in your hand. When you're playing your cards, your goal is twofold. 1, you're adding up the points on the cards, aiming for 15 and 31. So each face card is worth 10 points. All other number cards are worth their number. Aces are worth 1. So when the first person plays their card, they call it a number, say 7. And if you have an 8, you could play an 8, and then you've gotten the total to 15, and you say 15 for 2. And that's F-O-R, the number 2. 15 for 2 points. And then you move your point score up 2 points on the grid. Then the next player goes, and they might say they played another 8. Now the total's at 23, which is not worth anything. But if they played an 8 after your 8, now that's a pair, so they could call pair for 2. So they get 2 points. Then someone else would do something else. They maybe they could have another 8. If it's at 23 and they call 8, that puts it at 31, which actually would get them a lot of points, because first they would get 2 points for bringing the total to exactly 31. Then they would get 6 points for playing the third 8 in a row. The 6 points come from the fact that third 8 makes 3 pairs. The first, like the ace of clubs and ace of diamonds, the ace of diamonds and ace of spades, and the ace of spades and ace of clubs. A fourth 8 played next would get 12 points because it's 4 pairs. Each pair of cards combines with each other pair of cards in order to make a set. There's also runs and a couple other things. After the total gets to 31, then it starts over at 0 with the next player. Now, if it's not 231 exactly, but nobody can play, or let's say it comes to me and the total's at 29, I don't have a 1 or 2, then I would have to say go. And it goes around the table until it gets back to the person who played that card at 29. If they also can't play a card, Then they say last, take 1 point, and start the count over, and the next person starts the count over at 0. So this creates this tension where you're trying to hit 15 and 31 exactly, or keep other people from doing so, and you're trying to make pairs and runs. On top of it, you also are trying to get a good hand, which you got dealt the hand, but you picked which card to discard. Because after everyone has done the play, then they do the show, which is where they all count the points in their hand and use that card that was on the starter deck as a 5th card in their hand to count points against. And then they bump those. Then after everyone's done that, then the dealer also counts those face down cards that everyone put in the crib as another hand. So cribbage ends up being pretty interesting because even though luck is really heavy, I mean, if you don't get a good hand of cards, that sucks. But there are enough places where there's variance through playing cards opposing to the other player, or the math involved in what kinds of cards you can get mean that you often can score at least a few points even on a crummy hand. And so over time, the luck balances out and the player who's a bit more skilled will come out ahead. At least that's the hope. Now the big thing is cribbage is you play to 121 points, which takes about a half an hour for 2 people. But then often, most cribbage boards like mine is set up with this long set of pegs that are meant to indicate games. So I think the idea is you would, over the course of a couple weeks maybe, play out first to 10 games. And again, as we all know with randomness, the more chances you have, the less significant any individual play is. So if randomness is a significant factor in cribbage, over time, that randomness evens out. Finally, there's an element of cribbage that we haven't done, which is that if someone else doesn't spot points, you can take them. It's not a race, you don't grab the points out from under them, but somebody counts their hand and they say done, and someone else could say, oh, there's a 15 you missed, I get 2 points. So that's a part of it as well. I doubt that my wife and I will ever do that. I don't think we like the stealing points from each other part of it. But all the rest of it is pretty interesting, and I suspect cribbage will become a regular part of our game nights for when we don't feel like playing something more complicated. I imagine if we played a lot, we could eventually get to the point where we play while we're watching TV, but I bet that's not going to happen. So, what are some old favorites that you break out when you go on trips? What are some games that you play with a standard pack of 52 cards? Pop over to the Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know your thoughts on these issues and anything else that pops up. How has your July been going? Are you having a lot of fun playing some games? Obviously, construction is continuing outside my house. Apologies for the noise. Only another year or so, I imagine. Haha. Anyway, thanks for joining me on my walk today. I look forward to next time we walk together, and I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.